On a quiet, humid afternoon in the heart of a bustling city courthouse, an elderly black man named Mr. Samuel Carter slowly approached the grand double doors of the courtroom. His steps were deliberate, each one seeming to carry the weight of years filled with resilience, hardship, and unyielding determination. At 72 years old, Samuel wasn't just walking into that building to plead his case. He was stepping into a battlefield where justice, for men like him, often felt like an elusive dream. Samuel was known in his neighborhood for his kind heart and unshakable moral compass. A retired mechanic and widower, he had spent his life raising his grandchildren and fixing the cars of anyone who needed help, often for free. But today, he wasn't here for an act of generosity. He had been wronged, deeply wronged, by a shady property developer who had exploited a legal loophole to seize the small plot of land Samuel's family had owned for generations. That land wasn't just property to Samuel. It was his legacy, the one piece of his history he had hoped to pass down. As he entered the courtroom, his hands trembling but steadying themselves on his cane, Samuel looked around. The air inside was cold, the kind of cold that seeped into your bones and made you question if the world outside still existed. People murmured in hushed tones as they waited for their cases to be called. To Samuel, the courtroom felt like a cathedral of power, but not the kind that came with righteousness. This was power that intimidated, oppressed, and silenced. When Samuel's name was called, he stood, his back straightening with quiet resolve. His attorney, a young but earnest woman named Maya Patel, stood by his side. Maya had taken his case pro bono, her fiery passion for justice making her a rare find in a world where legal help often came with a hefty price tag. As they moved toward the judge's bench, the atmosphere shifted. The towering figure behind the bench, Judge Gerald Townsend, peered down at Samuel with a look that was both dismissive and cold. Judge Townsend was a man known for his stern demeanor, but beneath his robe and gavel lay a reputation for being partial, particularly against those who came from marginalized communities. Samuel had heard whispers of his bias, but he hadn't wanted to believe them. Today, however, those whispers were about to become painfully real. Judge Townsend cleared his throat. "Mr. Carter," he began, his voice low and gravelly, "do you understand the nature of the case you're bringing to this court?" Samuel nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. I'm here to reclaim what's rightfully mine." As Samuel began to explain his situation, Townsend raised a hand, cutting him off mid-sentence. "Mr. Carter, I've reviewed the initial filings, and I must say, this case appears to lack merit. Frankly, it seems like a waste of this court's time." Maya quickly interjected, her voice steady but edged with frustration. "Your Honor, with all due respect, the evidence we've submitted clearly outlines—" "Enough, Counselor," Townsend snapped, his tone sharp enough to silence the room. "This court does not have time for baseless claims." Samuel felt a knot tighten in his chest, but he refused to lower his gaze. "Your Honor," he said, his voice firm but respectful, "all I ask is for you to hear my case." Judge Townsend leaned back in his chair, his expression hardening. "And I am telling you, Mr. Carter, that I have the discretion to decide what cases are worth this court's time. Yours is not." The room fell silent, the weight of the judge's words pressing down like a suffocating fog. Maya looked at Samuel, her eyes silently asking if he wanted to push further. Samuel's lips pressed into a thin line, his resolve unshaken. He had spent his entire life fighting against systems designed to hold him back. This was just another battle. As the gavel came down, signaling the end of the hearing, Samuel turned to Maya. "They're not going to help us," he said, his voice tinged with quiet anger. "But that doesn't mean I'm giving up." Maya nodded, her own determination mirroring his. "Then we'll find another way." Outside the courthouse, the world carried on as if nothing had happened, but Samuel knew this wasn't the end. He had a plan, one that would challenge the very foundations of a system that had failed him. What he would do next would shock not just the courtroom, but an entire community. And it all started with a simple truth. Sometimes, when the system refuses to hear you, you have to make your voice impossible to ignore. As Samuel and Maya stepped into the bright afternoon sunlight, The courthouse doors closing behind them felt heavier than they should. The buzzing of the city carried on, honking cars, hurried footsteps, distant conversations, but to Samuel, it felt like the world had paused, leaving him alone in the deafening silence of his thoughts. He clutched his cane tightly, his calloused hands trembling not with weakness but with the kind of anger that only years of injustice could cultivate. Maya walked beside him, her mind racing as she tried to piece together their next move. "Samuel," she said softly, careful not to break the fragile quiet between them, "we still have options. There are appeals processes, legal avenues." He stopped abruptly, turning to face her. His eyes, lined with decades of experience and hardship, met hers with an intensity that made her words falter. "Maya, I've been walking this road my whole life, always told to wait, to trust the process, to believe that justice would come if I just stay patient. But patience hasn't put food on my table. It hasn't protected my family. And it sure as hell hasn't gotten my land back." His voice didn't rise, but the weight of it lingered in the air, each word a testament to years of suppressed frustration. Maya nodded, her heart heavy. She had seen this look before, not just in Samuel, but in others who had come to her seeking help. It was the look of someone who had been fighting an uphill battle for so long that the ground itself seemed determined to swallow them whole. "I understand," she said finally. "But I promise you, we're not out of options. We just need time." Samuel didn't reply immediately. Instead, he looked out at the street, his gaze fixed on something far beyond the cars and buildings. He was remembering, thinking about the days when that land had been more than just a plot of earth. It had been his wife's garden, where she grew vegetables and tended flowers with a gentle touch. It had been the space where his grandchildren learned to ride their bikes, their laughter filling the air. It had been his sanctuary, and now it was gone, snatched away by someone who saw it as nothing more than a business deal. "We don't have time," he said finally, his voice low but firm. "They'll start construction soon. Once they break ground, there won't be anything left to fight for." Maya frowned. She knew he was right. The property developer had wasted no time after filing the eviction notice. They'd already put up fencing and signs announcing the construction of luxury apartments. It was all happening so fast, too fast, almost as if someone had made sure the process would be smooth for them, regardless of who got hurt in the process. As they walked towards Samuel's modest home, a sense of urgency began to creep into Maya's thoughts. She had seen corruption in the legal system before, but this case felt different. It wasn't just about the land, it was about the principle. If Samuel lost, it would set a precedent, a message that people like him could be brushed aside without consequence. She couldn't let that happen, not to Samuel, not to anyone. When they reached his house, Samuel paused on the porch, his eyes scanning the yard as if seeing it for the first time. The house was old, its paint peeling in places, but it was sturdy and full of memories. The garden, once vibrant with life, now sat overgrown, a quiet reminder of what had been. He sighed and turned to Maya. "Come inside," he said. "I want to show you something." Maya followed him into the house, the faint scent of wood polish and old books filling the air. Samuel led her to a small room at the back, where stacks of papers and photographs were neatly arranged on a worn wooden table. He picked up a photograph and handed it to her. "This is my father," he said. "And that's my grandfather beside him. They built this land from nothing, cleared it with their own hands, laid every brick, planted every tree. It's not just a piece of property, Maya. It's history. It's sacrifice. It's family." Maya studied the photograph, her chest tightening. The men in the picture stood tall, their faces marked by the sun and the struggles of their time, but their eyes held a quiet pride. It was clear that the land meant everything to them, just as it did to Samuel. "We'll fight for it," Maya said, her voice steady. "We'll fight for all of it." Samuel nodded, but there was a look in his eyes that Maya couldn't quite place. It was as if he already knew something she didn't, as if he had a plan forming in the back of his mind, one he wasn't ready to share. The next day, Samuel began making calls. He reached out to old friends, community leaders, anyone who might be willing to help. The responses were mixed. Some were supportive, others hesitant. Most were afraid of getting involved in a fight that seemed impossible to win, but Samuel didn't waver. He knew that change didn't come from waiting. It came from standing up, even when the odds were stacked against you. Meanwhile, Maya dug deeper into the property developer's history. What she found only fueled her determination. The company, Belmont Enterprises, had a long record of shady dealings, displacing families, exploiting legal loopholes, and cutting corners to maximize profits. And yet, they had always managed to stay just within the bounds of the law, their connections shielding them from any real consequences. As days turned into weeks, the tension grew. The community began to take notice of Samuel's fight, and whispers of his determination spread. Some people started showing up at his house, offering words of encouragement or small donations to help with legal fees. Others brought food or supplies, small gestures that spoke volumes about their support. But not everyone was on Samuel's side. Late one night, as he sat on his porch, watching the stars, a sleek black car pulled up in front of his house. A man in a crisp suit stepped out, his demeanor calm but calculating. He approached Samuel with a practiced smile. "Mr. Carter," the man said smoothly, "my name is Mr. Daniels. I represent Belmont Enterprises. I'm here to discuss an offer." Samuel didn't respond immediately. He simply leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving the man's face. "We understand that this situation has been difficult for you," Daniels continued, his tone almost sympathetic. "Belmont is prepared to make you a generous offer for your cooperation, far more than the market value of your land." Samuel finally spoke, his voice calm but firm. "It's not for sale." Daniels chuckled lightly, as if amused by the response. "Mr. Carter, I don't think you understand. This offer is more than fair. It's an opportunity to walk away from this with dignity." Samuel's gaze hardened. Dignity isn't for sale either. The man's smile faltered, replaced by a hint of irritation. He took a step closer, his voice dropping. "Think carefully, Mr. Carter. You're an old man fighting a losing battle. This offer won't come again." Samuel stood, his back straight despite the weight of his years. "You tell your bosses this. I may be old, but I'm not weak, and I'm not afraid of them." Daniel stared at him for a long moment before turning and walking back to his car. The engine roared to life, and the car sped off into the night, leaving Samuel alone on the porch, his resolve stronger than ever. As the days passed, Samuel's fight began to gain attention beyond the community. Local news outlets picked up the story, painting him as a symbol of resistance against greed and corruption. But with every step forward, the stakes grew higher, and the threats became more personal. Still, Samuel refused to back down. He knew this wasn't just about his land. It was about standing up for what was right, no matter the cost. And deep down, he knew the battle was far from over. The days grew heavier as Samuel's fight gained momentum. What started as a quiet stand against injustice was becoming something much bigger, a ripple spreading through the community, igniting both hope and fear. Word of Samuel's refusal to bow to Belmont Enterprises reached every corner of the neighborhood, and it wasn't long before whispers of support began to take the shape of action. One evening, a group of young activists knocked on Samuel's door. They introduced themselves as part of a grassroots organization dedicated to protecting communities from corporate overreach. Their leader, a passionate woman named Elena Rivera, explained how they'd been tracking cases like Samuel's for years. "We've seen this before," she said, her eyes blazing with determination. "Developers come in, push people out, and strip the heart out of neighborhoods. But you've got something they didn't count on, a community that's ready to fight back." Samuel listened carefully, his weathered face unreadable. He had always been a man of few words, letting his actions speak louder. But tonight, as he looked at the young faces surrounding him, he felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in years: hope. Elena continued, outlining a plan to raise public awareness about Samuel's case. "We'll hold rallies, start a petition, and get local leaders involved. If we can get enough attention, we can force Belmont to back down." Samuel nodded slowly. "You can count me in, but remember, they'll push back harder than we can imagine." And push back they did. Within days, Belmont's response was swift and ruthless. Flyers appeared on doors and fences, warning of delays in construction that would harm the local economy. Anonymous social media accounts began spreading rumors about Samuel, accusing him of being greedy and holding up progress. It was clear Belmont wasn't just trying to win in court, they were trying to turn the community against him. But Samuel's resolve only deepened. He wasn't alone in this fight anymore, and he refused to let fear dictate his actions. As Alina and her team organized the first rally, Maya focused on the legal battle. She filed an appeal, this time including new evidence of Belmont's unethical practices. One late night in Maya's cramped office, surrounded by stacks of paperwork, she stumbled across something that sent a chill down her spine. Among the documents related to Belmont's construction permits, she found an internal memo outlining a payment made to a city official, just days before the judge had dismissed Samuel's case. It wasn't definitive proof of corruption, but it was enough to raise serious questions. Maya shared her discovery with Samuel the next morning. As they sat at his kitchen table, she laid out the papers carefully. "This could be the break we need," she said. "If we can prove they bribed city officials or Judge Townsend, we might have grounds to get the case reopened." Samuel studied the papers in silence. Finally, he said, "It's a risk, Maya. If we accuse them without solid proof, it could backfire." "I know," she admitted, "but we can't let them keep getting away with this. We'll dig deeper, find more evidence. I just need time." Time, however, was running out. The first construction crews arrived on the disputed land, tearing down the old fencing and preparing the ground. Samuel watched from the sidewalk, his heart heavy. It felt like they were erasing his history, piece by piece. But as he stood there, a group of neighbors joined him, their presence a silent act of solidarity. That night, Alina and her team held the first rally. Dozens of people gathered in front of the courthouse, holding signs that read, "Justice for Samuel" and "Stop the Greed." Samuel stood at the center, his voice strong as he addressed the crowd. "This isn't just about me," he said, his words cutting through the cool night air. "This is about every family, every person who's ever been told they don't matter. We're not just fighting for land, we're fighting for dignity." The crowd erupted in cheers, their energy lighting up the night. But amidst the celebration, Samuel noticed a familiar figure watching from a distance. It was Mr. Daniels, the Belmont representative, his expression unreadable. Their eyes met for a brief moment before Daniels turned and walked away. As the rally continued, Maya received a tip from a source who claimed to have worked for Belmont. The source, a former employee named Curtis, agreed to meet at a diner on the outskirts of town. Maya arrived early, her nerves on edge. When Curtis finally walked in, he looked over his shoulder before sliding into the booth across from her. "I don't have much time," he said, his voice low. "But you need to know, Belmont doesn't play fair. They've got people in their pocket, and they'll do whatever it takes to win." Maya leaned forward. "Do you have proof? Anything we can use?" Curtis hesitated, glancing around the diner. "There's a file. Internal documents. I don't have them, but I know where they're kept. If you can get them, it'll blow this whole thing wide open." Maya's heart raced. "Where?" Curtis scribbled an address on a napkin. "It's their off-site storage. High security, but if you're smart, you can get in." Before she could ask more, Curtis stood abruptly. "I've said too much already. Be careful. These people don't play games." As Maya watched him leave, the weight of what he'd said sank in. She knew this was dangerous, but it was also their best chance to expose Belmont's corruption. Back at Samuel's house, Maya shared what she'd learned. Samuel listened carefully, his expression unreadable. Finally, he said, "If we do this, we have to be prepared for the consequences. They won't take this lying down." Maya nodded. "I know, but it's a risk we have to take." As the two of them planned their next move, the conflict continued to escalate. Belmont's threats became more aggressive, their tactics more ruthless. But Samuel's fight wasn't just about the land anymore. It was about showing the world that even the smallest voice could stand against the loudest injustices. And as the tension mounted, one thing became clear. The battle was far from over, and the stakes were higher than ever. The night felt heavier than usual as Samuel sat on his porch, staring at the darkened street. The wind carried the faint hum of the construction site, where his land was being prepared for a future he couldn't bear to imagine. Across town, Maya was busy assembling the documents she needed to plan their next step. They both knew the fight was reaching a critical point, but neither could shake the feeling that the walls were closing in faster than they could break through them. Elena's group had ramped up their efforts, flooding social media with posts about Samuel's story. The hashtag Justice for Samuel began to trend locally, drawing the attention of nearby communities. Volunteers showed up daily at Samuel's home, bringing supplies and offering to help however they could. The support was overwhelming, but it also painted a target on Samuel's back. Belmont wasn't the kind of company to let resistance grow unchecked. One afternoon, a black SUV rolled slowly past Samuel's house. The windows were tinted, and no one inside made an effort to step out, but their presence was deliberate. Samuel watched it from his window, his jaw tightening. He had faced intimidation before, but this was different. It felt calculated, like a warning that something bigger was coming. Meanwhile, Maya worked tirelessly to confirm the lead from Curtis. The address he had given her led to a nondescript building in an industrial part of town. It was fenced off and guarded, the kind of place that screamed secrecy. Maya enlisted the help of Elena's team to surveil the area, gathering information about the security patterns and looking for any weaknesses. Every step felt like walking a tightrope, the stakes too high to make a single mistake. As they planned their next move, the tension between Samuel and Maya began to show. Maya, Samuel said one evening, his voice low but firm, I appreciate everything you're doing, but I can't shake the feeling that we're walking into a trap. Belmont has resources we can't even imagine. What if this is exactly what they want us to do? Maya looked at him, her exhaustion clear in her eyes. I've thought about that, she admitted. But if we back down now, they win. They'll keep doing this to people, and no one will stop them. This isn't just about you anymore, Samuel. It's about all of us. Samuel sighed, the weight of her words settling over him. She was right, but it didn't make the path forward any less daunting. Just promise me, he said quietly, that you'll be careful. I've lived long enough to know how quickly things can go wrong. The next night, as the community gathered for another rally, the air was charged with a mixture of hope and unease. Samuel stood at the center, his voice carrying over the crowd as he spoke about the importance of standing up against injustice. But even as he spoke, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. His instincts proved correct. As the rally reached its peak, with chants of justice for Samuel echoing through the streets, a loud crash shattered the atmosphere. A group of men in hard hats and reflective vests emerged from the construction site, shouting at the crowd to disperse. Tensions flared as the two groups faced off, and it wasn't long before the police arrived, their presence adding to the chaos. The scene spiraled quickly, with accusations flying and tempers boiling over. Samuel watched helplessly as the rally he had hoped would inspire unity turned into a standoff. He stepped forward, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. Everyone, please, he called out. This isn't the way. His words had a calming effect, but the damage was done. The media, which had been covering the rally, turned its cameras on the confrontation. By morning, the narrative had shifted. News outlets painted the event as a riot instigated by anti-development activists, and Belmont wasted no time capitalizing on the bad press. They released a statement condemning the rally, framing Samuel and his supporters as obstacles to progress. Samuel felt the blow keenly, but he refused to let it break him. They're trying to discredit us, he told Maya and Elena, but we still have the truth on our side. That's something they can't take away. Maya finally got the break they needed when Elena's team uncovered a gap in the security at the storage facility Curtis had mentioned. It was a small window, just a few hours in the early morning when the guards rotated shifts. Maya knew it was risky, but she also knew it might be their only chance to get the evidence they needed. The night before the plan was set to go into motion, Samuel sat in his living room, the house quiet around him. He thought about his wife, about the promises they had made to each other to always protect what they had built. He thought about his grandchildren and what kind of world he wanted to leave for them. And he thought about the community that had rallied around him, their faces filled with hope and determination. Maya, he said when she came to check on him. "Whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know I'm proud of what we've done. Even if we don't win, we've shown them that we won't go quietly." Maya nodded, her throat tight. "We're not going to lose, Samuel. Not if I have anything to say about it." As dawn approached, Maya and Alina's team made their move. The storage facility loomed ahead, its steel doors reflecting the dim light of the street lamps. The plan was simple: get in, find the files, and get out before anyone noticed. But as they approached the building, the weight of what they were about to do pressed heavily on all of them. Inside, the air was thick with silence, broken only by the hum of fluorescent lights. Maya's heart pounded as she sifted through the rows of file cabinets, searching for anything that could expose Belmont's corruption. Time felt like it was slipping away too quickly, each second stretching into an eternity. And then, just as she thought they might leave empty-handed, she found it: a folder labeled Project Horizon. Inside were documents detailing payouts to city officials, backdated permits, and even communications between Belmont executives and Judge Townsend. It was everything they needed and more. But as they prepared to leave, the sound of footsteps echoed through the building. Maya's breath caught as the group froze, their eyes darting to the shadows. Someone was coming, and they had nowhere to hide. The footsteps grew louder, echoing through the storage facility like a drumbeat of impending danger. Maya's heart raced as she clutched the folder to her chest, her mind scrambling for a plan. Alina gestured for everyone to move toward the nearest shadowed corner, her finger pressed to her lips. The team crouched low, barely breathing, as the sound of heavy boots drew closer. A flashlight beam sliced through the darkness, sweeping over the rows of cabinets. Maya's grip on the folder tightened, her palms slick with sweat. Whoever was out there wasn't just passing through. They were searching for something, or someone. The air felt suffocating as the light hovered dangerously close to their hiding spot before moving away. Then, a sharp voice cut through the silence. "I know you're in here. There's no use hiding." Maya recognized the voice immediately. It was Mr. Daniels, the Belmont executive who had been overseeing the construction project. He wasn't alone. A second voice joined him, low and threatening. "Let's make this simple. Hand over what you took, and we can all walk out of here quietly." The team exchanged tense glances. Maya felt a wave of panic rising but forced herself to stay calm. She could see Alina silently mouthing, "Stay put, asterisk," but Maya knew they wouldn't have long before Daniels and his accomplice found them. Every second felt like a lifetime as the flashlight beam grew closer again. Suddenly, the sound of a phone vibrating broke the tense silence. One of the team members had forgotten to silence their device, and the faint hum gave away their location. Daniels turned sharply, the flashlight locking onto their corner. "There they are," he barked. Maya didn't think, she just acted. Clutching the folder, she bolted from the shadows, her shoes squeaking against the polished floor. Daniels and the other man shouted, their footsteps pounding behind her. The rest of the team scattered in different directions, creating enough confusion to buy her a few precious seconds. She ran down a narrow hallway, her breath coming in short, desperate gasps. Her mind raced as she tried to think of a way out. The exit was too far, and Daniels was gaining on her. Then she spotted a side door, slightly ajar, with a dimly lit staircase beyond it. Without hesitation, she darted through and slammed the door shut behind her, jamming a nearby chair under the handle to buy herself time. The staircase led to the roof, the cold night air hitting her like a slap as she emerged into the open. She could hear Daniels shouting below, his voice filled with anger and frustration. Clutching the folder tightly, Maya looked around for a way down. The adjacent building was close enough to jump to, but the gap was still dangerous. Before she could decide, the door burst open, and Daniels stepped onto the roof, his face twisted in rage. "You have no idea who you're messing with," he snarled. "Give me the folder, and maybe I'll let you walk away from this." Maya's mind raced as she backed away, her eyes scanning the rooftop for anything she could use to her advantage. "You think you can scare me?" she shot back, trying to keep her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. "The whole world is going to know what you've done." Daniel smirked, taking a step closer. "You think anyone's going to believe you? You're just another loud voice in a crowd that doesn't matter. Belmont owns this city. You can't win." But before he could take another step, a sudden commotion erupted below. Maya recognized the sound of sirens and the distant shouts of police officers. The rest of the team must have made it out and called for help. Daniels froze, his confidence faltering for the first time. Maya seized the moment. "Looks like your time's up," she said, her voice steady now. "You can't hide behind your money and connections anymore." As the sirens grew louder, Daniels turned and ran, disappearing back down the staircase. Maya stayed on the roof, clutching the folder as relief and adrenaline coursed through her. She had the evidence they needed, but she knew this was only the beginning. When she finally made it back to Samuel's house, the team was waiting anxiously. Elena rushed to her, her eyes wide with concern. "Are you okay? What happened?" Maya handed her the folder, her hands still trembling. "We got it," she said simply. "Everything we need to prove what they've done." Samuel took the folder, his expression grave as he flipped through its contents. "This is it," he said quietly. "This is what we've been waiting for." But just as relief began to settle over the group, Maya's phone buzzed with a text message. The number was unknown, but the message was chilling. Asterisk, "This isn't over. Walk away while you still can." Asterisk. The room fell silent as Maya read the message aloud. The fight wasn't just about land anymore. It was about power, corruption, and a system that wouldn't go down without a fight. They had the evidence, but Belmont wasn't going to let them use it without a battle. As the tension in the room grew, Samuel looked at Maya, his eyes filled with quiet determination. "We've come too far to turn back now," he said firmly. "They can try to scare us, but they can't take away the truth." The fight was far from over, and the stakes had never been higher. With the evidence in their hands and Belmont's threats looming over them, the team prepared for the next phase of their battle. They had exposed the corruption, but now they had to find a way to make the world listen. The morning of the court hearing was tense, the air thick with anticipation. Samuel, Maya, Elena, and the rest of the team gathered outside the courthouse, the folder of damning evidence clutched tightly in Maya's hands. The media was already there, cameras flashing and microphones poised as reporters shouted questions. The story had gained traction overnight, and the courtroom was packed with community members, activists, and curious onlookers. Inside, Judge Townsend presided over the hearing with his usual stern demeanor, but something was different this time. He seemed more alert, more wary, as if he knew the walls around him were beginning to crumble. Samuel sat silently, his hands folded, his presence commanding despite his humble appearance. Maya stood beside him, her confidence bolstered by the support of the people filling the gallery. Maya's opening arguments were sharp and precise, laying out the timeline of Belmont's actions and the impact on Samuel and his community. She presented the evidence methodically, each piece building on the last until the full scope of Belmont's corruption was laid bare. The room was silent as she described the payments to city officials, the falsified permits, and the email correspondence implicating Judge Townsend himself. When she placed the incriminating documents on the bench, the judge's face went pale. For a moment, it seemed like he might dismiss the evidence, but the weight of the public scrutiny surrounding the case made that impossible. He cleared his throat, his voice shaky as he asked Belmont's attorneys to respond. Belmont's lead lawyer, a slick man named Anderson, rose to his feet, his confidence unshaken. He attempted to discredit the evidence, claiming it was obtained illegally and questioning the motives of Maya and her team. But the community was watching, and Anderson's words rang hollow against the undeniable proof in front of them. As tensions in the courtroom escalated, a sudden commotion at the back of the room drew everyone's attention. Curtis, the former Belmont employee who had tipped Maya off about the storage facility, entered the courtroom, his head held high. He walked straight to the witness stand and swore to tell the truth. Curtis testified about the inner workings of Belmont, confirming everything Maya had presented and more. His bravery turned the tide, his words painting a damning picture of the company's operations. The courtroom erupted in murmurs, the weight of the testimony sinking in. Anderson tried to object, but his voice was drowned out by the mounting evidence and the resolve of those who had come to stand by Samuel. Judge Townsend, visibly sweating, called for order, his gavel striking repeatedly. As the proceedings continued, it became clear that Belmont and their allies, including the judge, were cornered. But just as the case seemed to be wrapping up, a final twist sent shockwaves through the room. Alina received a call from one of her team members stationed outside the courthouse. The message was brief but chilling. Someone had tampered with their cars, slashing tires and leaving threatening notes. Maya's heart sank as she listened to the whispered update. It was a desperate move by Belmont, a final attempt to intimidate and silence them. But instead of retreating, the team used the moment to amplify their resolve. Alina quickly sent photos of the damage to the press, turning the act of intimidation into a rallying cry. By the time the hearing adjourned for the day, the story had already gone viral, drawing attention from national outlets. The next morning, Judge Townsend shocked everyone by recusing himself from the case, citing personal conflicts. His replacement, a no-nonsense judge with a reputation for fairness, took over, setting the stage for an impartial decision. Belmont's legal team, now under intense scrutiny, scrambled to negotiate a settlement, but Samuel refused to back down. In a dramatic conclusion, the new judge ruled in Samuel's favor, invalidating Belmont's claim to the land and ordering an investigation into the company's practices. The courtroom erupted in cheers as the decision was read, the weight of the victory sinking in. But as the team celebrated outside the courthouse, Maya's phone buzzed with another anonymous message. This one was short but foreboding. Asterisk, you might have won this battle. But the war is far from over. Asterisk. She showed it to Samuel, who read it silently before handing it back. We knew this wasn't going to be the end, he said calmly, but we've shown them what we're capable of. They won't take us down so easily. As the sun set on the courthouse steps, Samuel and Maya stood together, surrounded by a sea of supporters. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time, it felt like they had a real chance. They had exposed corruption, inspired a movement, and proved that even the smallest voices could echo loudly when joined by others. The battle for justice had reached its climax, but the war for equality, fairness, and dignity was only beginning, and Samuel, with his quiet strength and unwavering resolve, was ready to face whatever came next.